What's the difference between sex and gender? It isn't as simple as you might think. Most of us have been raised with pretty simplistic ideas about sex and gender. Namely, that there are two sexes, male and female, and that they align with two genders, man and woman. But with the increased visibility of transgender, gender non-conforming, and non-binary folks, many people are beginning to understand that the categories of sex and gender are far more complicated. In this article, we'll break down the difference between sex and gender to give you a better idea of what each of these terms really means. What exactly is sex? Society typically tells us that there are two sexes, male and female. You may also be familiar with the fact that some people are intersex, or have a difference of sexual development, DSD. DSD is used to describe chromosomes, anatomy, or sex characteristics that can't be categorized as exclusively male or female. As with names and pronouns, it's important to refer to people in the manner that they prefer. Some people are comfortable with the term intersex and use it to describe themselves. Others have moved away from using this term and refer to their condition as a DSD. Genitalia. Some believe genitals determine sex, with males having penises and females having vaginas. However, this definition excludes some people with a DSD. It can also invalidate trans people who are non-operative, those who don't want to have bottom surgery, or pre-operative. For example, a transgender man, a person who was assigned female at birth and identifies as a man, may have a vagina but still identify as male. Chromosomes. We're typically taught that people with XX chromosomes are female and people with XY chromosomes are male. This excludes folks with a DSD who may have different chromosomal configurations or other differences in sexual development. It also doesn't account for the fact that trans people often have chromosomes that don't match their sex. A transgender woman, for example, can be female but still have XY chromosomes. Primary sex characteristics. We tend to associate a predominance of estrogen with females and a predominance of testosterone with males. It's important to understand that every person has both of these hormones. In fact, estradiol, the predominant form of estrogen, is critical to sexual function. Trusted source for people who were assigned male at birth. Estradiol plays a significant role in sexual arousal, sperm production, and erectile function. Although hormone replacement therapy is an option for trans and gender non-conforming people, a trans man who isn't on hormones, for example, isn't any less male than one who is. Secondary sex characteristics. Many secondary sex characteristics are easily identifiable. This includes facial hair, breast tissue, and vocal range. Because of this, they're often used to make quick assessments about sex. But secondary sex characteristics vary greatly, regardless of whether someone identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth. Take facial hair, for example. Some people who were assigned female at birth may go on to develop facial hair, and some who were assigned male at birth may not grow any at all. What is gender? Although a majority of people in our society do identify as men or women, there's a wide range of possibilities between and beyond the two. What's the relationship between gender and sex? Ultimately, the concepts of gender and sex are socially constructed. This means that we as a society assign sex and gender to people based on socially agreed upon characteristics. This doesn't mean that body parts and functions are made up, it just means that the way we categorize and define each of these things could actually be different. What is gender identity? Instead of making assumptions about how a person identifies, check in with the people you meet about their gender identity. Offer up your pronouns and ask what pronouns they use, and then use them. What is gender expression? Most of us possess both masculine and feminine traits. This means that someone who considers themselves to have a fairly normative gender identity can still fall closer towards the middle in terms of gender expression. Gender is different than sexual orientation. Sexual orientation has very little to do with your gender identity. It's solely about who you're attracted to. People of all gender identities may identify as straight or as somewhere on the LGBTQ+ spectrum. As we've seen here, sex and gender are far more complicated than many of us were raised to believe. The most important thing to remember is that it's up to each individual to determine their gender, and indeed, sex. The best thing you can do is respect the sex and gender identity of the people you encounter and treat each individual you meet with sensitivity and care.